what are we doing? If you're new to this course, you might be thinking this is different. And you may get the idea that what we're attempting to do is demonize the founding fathers or tear down historical figures. And that's not the point at all. What we want is critical thinking. That's why we want to give the full range of what happened so that we'll understand why it happened. So, example, last week's lecture, we talked about the Constitutional Convention, but I started by looking at the context that the country was in this big depression. And that is important to understand why people did what they did. You have to understand that full context. If you don't know the context, if you don't know what's going on, it's very hard to understand why people make the decisions that they make. And if you're learning a history that's only invested in glorifying someone, then you may omit a lot of those details and you won't understand the full scope of what happened and why it happened. But let me be clear, this is not an objective history. And I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, I pointed out that Thomas Jefferson in his 40s is involved with Sally Hemings, who's like 14 years old. And I made it a point to say that this person is basically a child rapist. Why is that an important detail to point out? It may or may not be. But the reality is, I am an American descendant of slavery. My family was enslaved in this country by people like Thomas Jefferson. So it's very difficult for me to have positive feelings about this man. I don't like him. Right? I'm not inclined to like Thomas Jefferson. In the same way that anyone would understand that if you're a Jewish person, you may not be inclined to like Nazis, right? Or Nazi sympathizers. So there's no objectivity necessarily. But that's the point. There is no such thing as an objective history at all. There's never an objective history. And so what we learn in schools, or the story that we all accept or understand as the American story, just like any other story, it's based on power. And I'll give you an example. For years and years and years, there's been a lot of back and forth about the Israelis and the Palestinians and who has, a just claim to that land. And a lot of people will support the Israeli view and say, well, they occupied that land some 3,000 years ago, so they were there before the Palestinians, and so we should respect that claim. Okay, but is it also acceptable to say that the United States of America participated in the enslavement of people and their descendants have a claim also for reparations for something that happened 150 years ago? And if you poll a lot of people, there are a lot of people who would say the claim from 3,000 years ago, we should respect that for the Israeli people, but not the claim for 150 years ago. It's not that one is right or wrong. It's about who has the power to enforce their view of the world. Who has the power to say this is how we should think about these things? And that's really what history is in many ways. And you can understand who actually has power in the world based on the history that you learn. For example, every year the US president gives a State of the Union address. And when they give that speech, they will tell you how hard they're working and how great their administration is and all the wonderful things that they're doing for the American people. And if you just listen to that address, you would think this is the greatest president ever. And then a few minutes after that, the opposing party, so if there's a Republican president, the Democratic Party will have a response to the State of the Union. And they will go and say all of that is terrible, the world is terrible, everything's just so bad. Now here's the crazy part. Both the president and the people responding to the president will use data, they will use facts, they will use news reports, they will use things that are true to make their case, to tell their story. Who's right and who's wrong, right? So what we're doing here is we're trying to present American history. And what we want to focus on is the motivations of the actors, rather than saying who's right and who's wrong, rather than glorifying someone or demonizing someone. Let's look at the motivators. And we talked about those primary motivators that really explain so much of the world. Race/national origin, power, and money. People want power. They want to control the world around them. People want money. People will do all types of things for the sake of earning money. And race/national origin, someone being other, will very often influence how people approach them. And so if you understand that these motivators, they're very powerful in how they work in the world, you can understand people's actions very much of the time. So the closest that we can get to objective, because there's no such thing as truly objective. What we can do though is we can focus on the actors and look at their actions and the why. And if you understand the why, you're really, really ahead of the game. You're way ahead of the game, in fact. Because if you can look at the world around you and you can ask that critical question of why, you're in a much better position to navigate your world and to be successful, because most people only respond to what happens. They never ask why. And that is the key to outthinking everyone else around you, asking why. So as we go through this history, we're going to continue to give context, look at the full picture of what happens, and not just say this happened, but why did this happen? Why did they do that? And if you can look at the world that way, today, you're in a much better position to run circles around people, because people aren't asking why. And if you can understand what motivates human behavior, you can predict what's coming and you can navigate around your competition. So as we go forward week to week, keep this in mind. It's not about glorifying anyone. It's not about demonizing anyone. It's to understand the why, and we're going to get as close to that as possible.